Welcome to The Impossible, where we empower others to face the impossible, inspire them to be impossible, and motivate them to do the impossible. And I'm back this week with my brother, Austin Douglas. How you doing today, sir?
Fantastic. Hello, everyone.
Yeah. We got a solo podcast, or duo podcast this week, I
Solo
guess.
duo podcast.
Solo duo podcast. I love it. What are we chatting about today for people?
Oh, we're going to talk about courage in the face of adversity. What you see yourself as, how you speak to yourself, how you go and face and kind of charge into the storm. I know that phrase, that I've said it before on here at least, and I'm sure that a lot of people have heard it, just kind of through the within the ether of, how buffalo herds will go straight into a storm knowing that it's going to be over quicker, rather than just sporadically crawling around and just kind of hoping for the best. And I would say that that kind of narrative of facing adversity, with the most courage and sheer will and discipline and determination and all that stuff. I know that we've talked about many of those keywords, I suppose, but I think courage is another one. Is something that we need to kind of offer some people and what that means for us in our lives, because it's certainly a lot more like determination and consistency and discipline are a lot more, I would say, they're much more like tangible sort of terms that we use when we're pursuing an impossible goal. But courage is something that's a lot more personal. It's something that is a lot, at least in my experience, it was something that was a lot more difficult to be able to settle into, was having this sort of willingness to, first open yourself up to being more vulnerable and more honest with yourself. And then when you come out of that, it's this very stark moment for you to really, some may call it, tighten up the bootstraps, and some might, some people just, it's more of just like, get up and get on your feet and start moving. Well, you got to have the courage to do that as well. You have to have the courage to really take yourself to that next level and allow yourself to then instill the discipline to embrace determination and how it gets you across the finish line of one goal and then to many goals. But, really courage for me, I had found that, in the beginning, it was something that required a lot of honesty with self, but also, like I said, it really allows you to procure a much more visible future when you get on the other side of fear. Everything you desire is on the other side of fear is something that I kind of brought up. I talked about on school, and I think courage is something that really is a big portion. I would say it plays a very big part and crucial part in getting you kind of on the other side of fear is to have the courage to really to stand up for yourself and to really challenge yourself and take that next step.
Yeah. It's, I love that this is the topic for today, because it's something we've been talking a lot about on the school community, which I completely neglected telling you guys about at the beginning of the episode. So if you want to scroll down just a little bit and click that top link in the show notes, jump on our school community, and you can dive deeper into these conversations that we have on the podcast, off the podcast. It's a very collaborative, community-based space, and honestly, once you get on there, you'll stop using traditional social media, because the connection, the authenticity, everything about it is just that powerful. There's no bots, there's no ads, there's no AI generated nonsense that's going on there. It's just pure, authentic human connection. That's what we have on there, and we all grow deeper in our understanding of our own pursuit and what it means to be impossible on that platform. So click that link and check it out. But this is something we've been chatting a lot about on the school platform, this idea of, and at first it started out for me, I was telling you, like, it started with being comfortable with fear. And I realized I didn't like that term. It's the wrong term, because really, if something is truly challenging enough, if something is truly pushing us to that impossible level, it's by default not going to be comfortable. Mm-hmm. It's not supposed to be comfortable. If you're comfortable, you're not pushing hard enough. So I like that you brought in the word courage, because we want to be able to be courageous in the face of fear. It provides that same level of control, that same level of composure, yet from an entirely different angle of strength rather than sloth, So courage is a much better word to use in this case. And I love the buffalo analogy you bring up too, because the way that the full analogy is expanded actually is that cows, so just normal dairy cows, Angus beef cows, whatever they are, cows will actually run away from a storm as a means to try to avoid it. And they don't understand that they cannot run away from the storm. They've defined their own reality such to the point that they're never going to outrun that storm. It is going to catch up and it's going to overtake them, and them running in the direction that they are will make them have to endure the storm far longer. Mm-hmm. Buffalo and bison, on the other hand, run directly into the storm, because they will then be moving in the opposite direction of the storm, and both paths will cause the storm to last a much shorter amount of time. So really what that shows is the same thing in life. You see people who try to run away, try to escape their problems, try to avoid any sort of challenge whatsoever, because they think that, they associate challenge as bad. They associate fear as bad. They associate all of these, the storms of life as bad and something to be avoided. Mm-hmm. Yet you'll find others who charge directly head first into that storm, because they know that storm will be over more quickly, but also they know that is the best way to gain as much out of that storm as possible in the form of strength, in the form of resilience, in the form of courage. And I think that's a really powerful analogy. So it maybe it means that we should all be eating bison instead of beef, really get that clean, organic,
grass-fed protein. By the way, this was a pro ground bison marketing scheme. Yeah, marketing ploy.
Sponsored by Bison.
Bison.
It's what's for dinner.
And it will be for dinner, because there is ground bison up in the fridge.
I'm so hungry right now. Yeah. Guys, we had a little bit of trouble getting set up today. Sometimes what you don't see on camera is all of the challenges, all the storms we go through just trying to get these podcasts set up. And little weird things happen, like our audio interface. We got a new kind of temporary Band-Aid one we're figuring out. And there was some challenges we had figuring it out. Our SD card was acting up and doing a bunch of really weird, wonky things. So it took us quite a long time to get fully set up and recording today. But here's the thing. Even though those weren't like impossible, mind-numbing, fear-inducing challenges, there's still challenge that comes up that's unexpected, that massively delays the time frame, affects the plan. And when you operate on such a high level that everything needs to go according to plan to be able to accomplish in a day what you intend, it can become quite challenging when things fall off plan. But here's the secret piece is we have to be able to control and regulate our emotions in those situations, because getting frustrated, getting angry, getting fearful, getting resentful, none of those provide any sort of benefit to the situation. And this is where the piece of courage comes into play. I think a lot of people like to view courage as a choice. They think, when I'm facing a situation of massive fear, I'm going to choose to be courageous. And I think there's some element of a choice in there. But I think what we fail to recognize is we don't all have just this courage switch inside of us that we switch it on and all of a sudden you're flooded with 4,000 lumens of courage. It's more so a skill that you have to build up.
Yeah, it's a tank that you have to be able to work towards filling up to then be able to use it. Absolutely. In the future.
And even then, like, you have to be able to build a skill of accessing that tank as well as then using it appropriately. That's why it's so important to do things like the cold plunge, like the squatting that we do. Put ourselves in these periods of controlled fear, controlled anxiety, controlled extreme challenge, where it feels to our bodies and our minds as if, we're going to die. This is an impossible challenge. Yet, logically, we know it's totally controlled, and actually, physically, it's totally controlled to the point that if something were to go wrong, we can reverse the situation very quickly. But it's still important to put ourselves in those positions because it builds up that skill every single day. It builds the reserve in that tank. It makes that switch easier to flip because I do it every single day, multiple times a day now. And that's been one of the most powerful things of the cold plunge, but it's also why it's what I've started using lifting for as a primary source of building up that courage reservoir and in accessing that switch in a series of movements that's quite unnatural for me and quite fearful for me in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and being able to, like you said, access the tank. Going into the bone marrow transplant was a moment of where I needed everything that I would be able to access within that tank for that. And I know that for the first time I was diagnosed, and then for my first relapse, it was a bit difficult to state that I was able to be courageous in those moments. I mean, I still fell pretty far, especially during the first round of treatments. When I was upgraded to Cleveland, there were many moments there where I didn't feel courageous at all. I didn't have any courage. I didn't have any, willpower. It was just survival, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, I know that looking back, I wish I could have put a little bit more effort into allowing myself to be courageous in those moments, to provide a little bit of comfort for, and I know you said you don't like the word comfort, but it was something I wanted to try to provide more comfort for those who were around me for what I was going through, because they would see me and again, when I started with Cleveland, obviously that's where the hair came, that's where all the hair came off. The skin was pale, and my side effects were really kind of ramping up. And I know that it was difficult for a lot of people to watch me and to witness that kind of happening. Going from the first 2 months of treatment that I had down here in Belpre, going fairly well, it seemed, and I was still lifting with you guys and eating really, really well. And we were kind of expecting the side effects to kick in eventually, but, to go from a full head of hair to everything at once, with Cleveland, in just a short amount of time into that round, it didn't offer a lot of comfort for those around me experiencing that. And so I wish that I would have been more courageous at that time to really, to embrace some things. Now, I wasn't totally trying to escape that realm. I mean, I did get to see my nieces and nephew occasionally when I was there. And, got to experience some moments there, which was really, 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 really nice. And coming down here to see you in the gang, it was really, those moments were those moments were very helpful for me, not necessarily in the realm of like, oh, now I have this, this absolute wealth of courage. No, it was just more of, I was just trying to survive. But going into the first relapse, I would say I had some courage. I had that tank somewhat built up, but I think that in that moment, I didn't have the ability, like you were saying, to access it. Because as soon as I got down to Houston, I mean, I realized that I was going to be down there by myself for 5.5 weeks. And there were certainly many, many moments that I could have elected to be more courageous in facing some of the adversities that I had down there. But when you're alone like that, it really does, it really makes it a lot more difficult to see and to be able to reach for that ability to access the fuel tank. Like I knew that I had some willpower and determination in there, but again, it felt like I was just surviving. And it was because I didn't have my crew there, like, I mean, you and Matthew, came down and visited me, which was it
was a good time.
Horrible
circumstances. But
I know,
time.
but it really was just so nice just to talk to people. I was only talking to, well, I mean, after we did the 3 days of chemo, and then I had my the T-cell infusion for the 4 weeks after that. The 1 month that I had to stay there, like I really didn't talk to anybody except for you on the phone. And that was really, really rough. But going into the bone marrow transplant, I would say that at that point, especially with what we had started to do with Impossible Performance, we had started the podcast, after my Houston trip, before the Houston trip.
I believe it was before.
Yeah, it was before
2023.
Yeah. So it was, before, and then going into 2024 and finding out that I'd relapsed, we were well into the podcast. And really seeing Impossible Performance, really set its roots. And between having done the work with, sort of shaping and setting the foundations of the of those who I call family now, and then ultimately going into that next relapse, because, coming out of Houston, they told me, they're like, hey, typically we tell people to go do the bone marrow transplant after this therapy. And I'm like, well, I told you that I was doing this therapy, so I didn't have to do the bone marrow transplant. And they're like, oh, we said that? And I'm like, yeah, you told me 2 months ago. So, that was awesome. And so I, coming home, I just kind of expected to relapse. And so I had about a year's time to really prep myself for a bone marrow transplant, knowing that it was probably going to happen. So then September 2024 comes along, and it's just like, all right, I relapsed again, within 6 months again. And so we get prepared for that, and I have that really rough introductory chemo before we actually got to the transplant itself. And I would say that was the first time that I was truly able to access that tank of courage. Courage. And that really, that gave me a much more brighter light to see at the end of the tunnel, because at that point I was able to get on the other side of fear with that courage, knowing that I had the family set up that I wanted to have. I had, and that being, the support group that I had going into the transplant, and that I was, hopefully, I was going to be taken care of, while there, because, again, this was, you have your dosage and stuff, but then you have to stay for an entire month, post, and those days were really, really, really rough. I know surviving was definitely a part of it, but at the same time, I wouldn't let my mother, except for a few days, she did have to drive in there, but like every single day we had to go into the hospital. So we had to drive like 20 minutes one way just to go into Cleveland Clinic and see that, and see them and get checked and stuff. And, that was me trying to enact a little bit of that courage, a little bit of that like determination to get through this, and to find a way to really battle something that was, seemingly unending at that point. And so coming out, and so doing that every day, and then coming out of the bone marrow transplant and trying to recover again, the January 2025, I had spent, the entire month staying up north, and I'd come down here every weekend, to record and stuff. But like, again, I was by myself, 5 days a week. It was really, really rough. And, knowing that I had to be courageous in those moments to not only get through what I was getting through, but also to then at that point, like I had said before with, the previous trip or previous rounds of treatment, this round of treatment here, I really, really, really wanted to make sure that I was kind of on point to not show people not, I don't want to call it weakness, but I wanted to show people that, in the face of some pretty severe adversity, that I was still charging into the storm to get through it. And to not only get through it, but to then come out on the other side in a much, much better position in life. And I would hope that, well, my intention was, and if it is received as this, then I'm very, very thankful. And if it's not, then to each their own. But my intention was is that once I came out of the storm, I would not only say that I felt better, but I would have the courage to actually exemplify that post BMT, that I was going to be a different person. And I feel that I have done that with a lot of success, and it's only getting better and better from here. And that's because going into the bone marrow transplant versus the previous rounds of treatment, I was able to be more courageous. I was able to implement more courage, knowing that if I were to get to the other side, I would be able to impact many, 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 many more people, and to not only share my story. I mean, sharing our stories is obviously the most important, or not the most important part. It is an important part, but the most important part is influencing lives in a positive manner with the stories. The impact itself is obviously the end goal for us, and so I feel exemplifying that courageousness, in moments of severe adversity, is something that is extremely paramount, and something that, kind of like you said, a skill set that people need to learn, and that you need to be able to hone in to be able to access that fuel tank, because you can have certainly a full fuel tank in terms of, what you've had to go through, and, you getting through some stuff, whatever to the severity it is, unique in your own perspective and experience. But having the skill set to be able to access that, like I certainly had 2.5 years of treatment, on and off of treatment, that, like, I went through some rough stuff, and I came out, on a good side. But, like, I had, 2.5 years of the tank filling, but I wasn't able to access it until I got to the bone marrow transplant. And coming out of the bone marrow transplant, I was able to utilize that courage, and it's only, and it like, you then soon realize that as you're continuously being courageous, that fuel tank never drops off. If you continue to really face towards those storms, and it's and within everybody's lives, the storms are not going to be, the storms are never ending. They're gonna continue to pop up. That's just the way it is. That's just the way that the weather works, especially for us in Ohio. We know thunderstorms all too well, but continuously embracing that level of courage into the future is only going to help you. And it's going to help you, and it's going to impact you in a positive manner, which then impacts those around you in a positive manner, which then, if you allow yourself to have that sort of influence on the community and beyond, a positive influence on that.
Yeah. So what do you think was, like, the key element? You talked about not being able to flip that switch very easily, not being able to access that tank of courage. What do you think were, like, the key elements in you being able to start establishing that skill?
Good question. I would say 3 things. The first was knowing the severity of the bone marrow transplant somehow offered me the opportunity to make the goals for the future much more clear. I had a much more clear vision of what the future was going to hold post BMT, because of seeing that the next 3 or 4 months were going to be hell. I knew that coming out of that and charging through that storm, full force, and having the courage to say that I was going to do it, and to ultimately do that. I think the first thing that helped me realize that was that I was able to produce, procure, and ultimately see a vision of the future that was much more clear than my previous rounds of treatment. Because I went through a lot of stuff on the previous two relapses, but at the same time, I did not come out of them like a strikingly different person versus the bone marrow transplant, where I did. The second thing that really helped with being able to access that was the vulnerability that I embraced. I really a lot of conversations with myself on the severity of the bone marrow transplant. It was very, very different from the previous rounds, obviously, in terms of the power of chemo that I was going to be going through, and how long it was going to take to recover. I mean, it was 6 days of chemo, and it took me 2.5, 3 months to recover from. Whoa. Secondly, the vulnerability and the honesty that I had to fight with in terms of knowing what potential future side effects that were going to be temporary to even permanent. Vulnerable about the the possibility of a permanent infertility, infertile future. Like aspects like that I really, it was it was a moment of like, okay, you have to take the gloves off, dude. Like this, you've been able to somewhat go through previous treatments and not really have something, underlying that is a result of that could be, potentially permanent. You got to skate through those. I kind of told myself, like, now you're going to have to take the gloves off. You're going to have to be brutal. Like, I always talk about being brutally honest with yourself. But for the bone marrow transplant, it had to, like, I had to have the sharpest of blades going towards that sort of victim feeling of like, oh, well, I'll just, everything will be fine afterwards. No, quite clearly that is not promised in the slightest, and you need to be vulnerable with yourself to make sure that you process that before you go into it. Because if I wouldn't have processed the possibility of permanent infertility, if I wouldn't have gone through and studied, the different potential cancer mutations down the road, because I can still, sure, maybe the nodular, maybe the classic Hodgkin's lymphoma is done. But, down the road, I could go and have a different mutation of a different type of cancer just from the impact of that chemo on the body. And so aspects like that, I had to be vulnerable with myself to say, okay, like these would really, really suck if they happen. But let's be honest with yourself and set up a plan that you are intentful about, and that you are intentioned on preparing yourself, if it comes up, to deal with that later. And I kind of forget the third thing that I was going to say. Yeah, the clear vision going forward, the vulnerability of what could happen from whatever form of adversity you're facing, as well. And the third thing, I'll just say kind of.
I think the honesty piece, and I'll dive into this in a second, but I think the honesty piece was almost an entire point in and of itself.
It could be, yeah. And I think ultimately it was. I think one last piece for that would just simply be the willingness to really embrace that fear, like you were talking about before. Like I of course I was scared of what could happen. Like the autologous stem cell transplant is one that not a whole lot of people have an issue with in terms of a reaction to the stem cells being infused themselves. That's for the potential next step. But like there's still there were a lot of things that just couldn't be guaranteed, that were maybe not guaranteed. The chances of some really bad stuff happening increased dramatically for the bone marrow transplant versus the previous two. And so what I had to do was, between the knowledge and the research that you and I did going into the bone marrow transplant in 2023 and then 2024 as well, with that knowledge, with the ability to really be vulnerable with myself and be honest with myself, and having a clear vision of what I wanted to accomplish post, I think all of that was that kind of all in one of me being able to go, okay, I no longer have a reason to fear the bone marrow transplant. I merely just need to get through it. And I'm going to get through it with knowing all that stuff, but also knowing that it's going to be rough. It's going to be, again, like 2.5 months to recover from this. That's wild, from 6 days of chemo. But it's possible. It's possible, and I'm going to do it. Like, I'm going to recover from it, and I look forward to the future after that storm. And so, yeah, ultimately, combining all those 3 points, clear vision of the future, vulnerability, and honesty, that I could take that fear and go, you're not going to have me this time.
Yeah, that's actually a really great process. I would propose to reorganize those steps in a more of a stepwise fashion. I would place vulnerability first, and then honesty, and then the clear vision. But the clear vision I interpret more as that aspect of the story we write ourselves.
Yeah.
So the vulnerability piece I see as being honest with who we are as people. Like, this is who I am right now. I have cancer. I am not incredibly strong in this capacity. Physically at the moment, you weren't in your highest peak performance shape.
I wasn't feeling too great.
Yeah. And you may even, somebody may even be in a place where they're like, I've not really faced a lot of challenge before. If you're a new cancer diagnosis, like the very first time you faced cancer, not that you never faced challenge before, but to that degree, it was a new arena for you.
Yeah.
So being very vulnerable is really essentially being totally exposed about who you are at this point in time in regard to the challenge you're facing. Then the honesty piece I see as being very clear on what the situation is and how you're interpreting the situation. Mm-hmm. So that's where the idea of this being at peace with fear comes in. Understanding that, hey, this is a freaking scary situation. Mm-hmm. I've never battled cancer before. Or maybe even on your third time. I've battled cancer before, but never like this. Yeah. Never with this kind of therapy. So being truly honest, you say that brutal honesty about, this is the situation, this is the circumstance, and it sucks and it's horrible and I would never choose this. But this is what it is. You're not trying to cover it up. You're not trying to tell yourself a lie. You're being totally open and exposed about what that situation is. So once you understand who you are, you understand truly what the situation is, then we can go to step 3, where essentially we decide the vision. We decide what story we're going to tell ourselves about it. So we're not lying to ourselves. We're being totally honest, totally open, totally exposed, totally vulnerable to who we are, what the situation is, and then we decide what the story is going to be. And we're probably going to do a whole separate podcast, maybe several episodes on this for you guys, because this is a new key aspect we've learned about our own message and our own mission, is that really so much of this identity shift we've been covering with a lot of guests starts with the story we tell ourselves about ourselves and the situations we're in. And this is the third and final crucial aspect to courage, because when you're you use the analogy of your cancer treatments, I would use the analogy, just because it's current in my day-to-day life, of either getting under a squat bar or even just getting in the cold plunge. The cold plunge is particularly powerful. I suppose the squat bar is too, but it's because it's something I do. The cold plunge I do nearly every day, and I still have to work through this same stepwise process of courage every single day. You know as well as I do. Take your shirt off, get ready, get prepped, and you stare down into that water, and that's when it hits.
Yeah.
You stare at the water, and it's like you can feel how intensely, miserably, paralyzingly cold it is. Mm-hmm. And you start to feel it in your soul before you even touch the water. And so you be honest about the situation you're facing. You're honest about, this is what this is what I'm about to do, and I feel an immense amount of fear about it. Well, then go ahead.
And also on the honesty piece, you also have to be honest about what you find when you're peeling back those layers of that vulnerable state. Mm-hmm. You have to be very, very, and I know I'm not recalling the precise conversation, and I wish I could, but I know Dr. Jordan B. Peterson has talked about that before, that when you go into, like when you travel into the abyss, and I know that's very much a Nietzschean kind of proverb, mm-hmm. I like to call it, of like, if you stare into the abyss for too long, the abyss will gaze into you. Mm-hmm. And that, like, when you get down to those kind of levels, you're gonna find a lot of stuff that you yourself are not comfortable mm-hmm. with about you.
Yeah.
And so and I'm not saying like I didn't have to go and like dredge up like, childhood trauma memories and all that stuff. That's not what I'm insinuating. But what I am saying is that when you go down and you dig deep and you're like, man, I still have this sense of fear, like going into this, like, and going into this moment where I'm going to have to face some adversity. Like, where's that fear coming from? You have to be willing to be vulnerable enough to find where that is coming from. And then secondly, you have to be very honest with yourself that when you find it, it may scare you. It may frighten you and go, whoa, that's me. Like, that was in me. I put that there. What? And you can't shy away from that, I guess is what I'm trying to like say here is like, you can't be like, oh, well, that's not me. Yeah. That's not me. No, that is you. You found it there. Now you have to accept it. You have to be willing to accept the responsibility and the accountability of what you find when you dig deep that far. Because it's going to be, it most certainly could be brutal. Mm-hmm. We are very complex creatures, and that goes on the positive sense and the negative sense as well. And so when you come up and you find that stuff, you really have to be honest with yourself about what you found, and then interpreting it as what it is in the most raw sense, and not trying to cover it up with a bunch of excuses and like, oh, well, I had that, but like, I kind of did this with it, and now, no, it's still potentially a turd that you found, and be honest about the turd. You don't have to cover it in gold. You don't have to paint it. It very much could be that, and you have to be honest with yourself about that, and then you can do something about it. Then you can clean that up.
Yeah. And that's the beautiful thing about courage is courage really is the antidote to the most negative aspects of the human condition and the most negative aspects of ourselves. And that's where, maybe the order is worth adjusting further one more time. Maybe the honesty piece comes first. Because when I think about the squat bar or the cold plunge, I definitely have to approach the situation first. Be very honest about what the situation is. And then I dive more deeply into peeling back those layers. You talk about exposing that vulnerability of, okay, this is what I'm facing. Who am I? And you're right. You'd get down to those layers, and it can be some pretty scary places, some pretty uncomfortable things you learn about yourself. But the beautiful piece of that, and this is why I say that courage is the antidote to the negative conditions, is because the third aspect is we get to write a different story. Mm-hmm. Just because you peel back some layers and find some horrendous, broken, fearful, damaged parts of yourself doesn't mean that is who you have to be forever. It's maybe like, and it doesn't even mean that that's your total identity right now. Mm-hmm. What it does mean is that you understand what you're facing, you understand who you are, and then you understand you can write a new story in this very act of courage. Yeah. So by climbing into the water, by maintaining as much control as possible, by climbing under the squat bar, by exhibiting as much strength as you can possibly muster, an impossible level of strength, by going through the treatment with as much control and composure as you can, all of that process, you're writing a new story for yourself. And I even take it so far as to tell myself, once I've faced the situation, I've become vulnerable with myself, then I like actively tell myself a new story in my head. And I don't make the story a lie. And I think that's very important as well. So I don't tell myself like, oh, this water's going to feel so warm, like I don't lie to myself. It's not going to feel warm. Yeah. Yes, if I tell myself it's warm, it'll probably feel warmer than if I tell myself it's cold, but I'm not going to lie to myself because there's no power in a lie. What I tell myself is this water is going to be cold. I'm strong enough to endure this cold. I'm designed to endure this cold, and I'm going to use this cold to make myself mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally stronger. That's the story I tell myself. And I can accomplish that in any situation, whether I spend 30 seconds in there or I spend 11 and a half minutes in there. It doesn't matter. I'm not constraining myself to a result of success versus failure that's outside of my control. Mm-hmm. Same with the squat bar. I never tell myself when I was under the 500 pounds, I never said, I'm 100% going to squat this 500 pounds without fail, because it was an impossible amount of weight I should not have been able to squat. I'm not going to create a beautiful lie for myself so as to distract myself from the reality of what's there. What I'm going to do instead is tell myself a different story, create a truth about myself in the face of that situation.
Mm-hmm.
I am strong enough to lift this weight. I am going to use this weight to bring forth an impossible version of myself of which I've never been able to do. I'm going to use this weight to display the height of human courage. I'm going to use this weight to display the height of mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical power that a human can exist or can exhibit in the impossible state. You know, all of these things are things that I can accomplish regardless of how the lift goes. Even if I crumble under it immediately, those are still truths that I can live out. And by actually telling myself that story in my brain, I link that back to the step 2, which would be the vulnerable state, in being able to write a new story about how I am. So even if I've uncovered the fact that, you know, I had this brokenness, this damage from everything I faced in my past as a child going through chemotherapy, I can basically revisit that child and say, hey, I know you're broken now, but look who you become. And that courage, both for myself in those impossible moments and for my former self who needed it most, that is the antidote to negative condition.
And it's like, I always picture it. I mean, I was thinking about this today when we were, when I was trying to drum up the theme. Was I kind of envision it like you have a flower pot, and like the soil just, you know, it's kind of getting rotten from the ground up, you know, and it's slowly creeping up, like the soil's just getting, you know, it's dying in its minerals because you've been absorbing the minerals, and it's kind of like, you know, re-soiling, you know, a flower pot. You know, you got to take the flower out. The flower's going to get uncomfortable because it's no longer in soil. It's no longer able to extract anything. You got to take it out. You got to take all the bad soil out, and you got to put the good soil back in, and then you put the, you know, flower back in, and then it can grow even more from there. And yeah, just had flowers on the mind.
That's why we keep cranking that thermostat down.
Yep.
Got to get down. You know, we got in the 40s, now we're in the 30s, and it's a whole new world.
I didn't want to feel my toes anyway, so it's fine.
Welcome to my world.
Right.
But it's, you know, I love that you brought up that the Nietzschean proverb, as you've so eloquently termed it. I love that you talked about how if you stare into the abyss for too long, it will start to stare into you, because that again brought my mind back to the cold plunge. If you stare into that water for too long, it can become a captivating thing and not a positively captivating thing.
Nope.
That delays, that allows that fear to grip you more tightly. And we talked about how there's a difference between the skill of building courage and the skill of accessing courage. One thing I've been working on with the cold plunge recently, because once I'm in the water, I can make myself stay there basically as long as I need to. Like, that's not a challenge anymore, really, regardless of how cold it is. But what the new challenge for me has been, how quickly can I put myself in that state of courage to get in the water? How quickly can I go through these 3 steps? And so that's really been my challenges of late. Rather than spending 30 seconds to a minute of just staring into the water and prepping myself and allowing myself to slip more deeply into that fear, I physically force myself to get in there a lot more quickly, even if I'm not totally ready yet. And then it's like I have to go through these steps in the moment while I'm actively getting in the water. But what it's doing is it's building up that skill of being able to access the courage, which I think is just as useful of a skill as having built that reservoir. And maybe it's a next step of mastery beyond just building the reservoir in and of itself.
Yeah, and finding whatever that sort of habitual daily ritual. There we go. Like finding that daily ritual for yourself. You know, if you don't have a cold plunge, obviously you can't, you know, rely on that for the moment. But like finding daily rituals that put you in that state of uncomfortableness, and how you learn how to get through that. You know, because I mean, even for me, like I still on the occasion when, you know, getting up ready to go into the cold plunge, I will stare into the water, and the water's most certainly staring back into me. And typically I get through it. Well, every time I do get through it, because I do end up in the water. But I don't know. For me, it does, because going through those different rounds of treatment, I most certainly gazed into the abyss for way too long, for way too long, and that's what, especially in 2022, that's what led me to some of those more unforgiving thoughts and temperaments. But I would say nowadays, like I find myself not yearning for those moments to stare into the abyss, but like every now and then I just kind of enjoy it, because I feel like I've been able to, like I've come out of, obviously, like I'm still here right now, but I've come out of those moments on top when may have stared into it for a bit too long, and I don't know. I don't know if you can call it a sense of enjoyment that I get out of doing that. Like even today, you notice it took me quite some time to get into the water, and I mean, and it was still sub 50, but you know, it's 45 degrees. Much warmer than what we did yesterday, and I still sat there and I just looked into it. I'm like, I have to get into this, and I want to, because I want to feel, to a degree, pun intended. I want to feel to a point, like what is being spoken back to me as I'm gazing into the abyss. Like what is the abyss, you know, when it gazes back onto me, like what am I hearing? What am I feeling? What am I experiencing in that moment? I certainly have found myself a bit, like I said, not yearning for those moments, but like I do, when those moments come up, staring into the water of a cold plunge, that I'm, you know, I know that obviously we both know what happens when you get out of it, and it's a, you know, but I sit there and I'll see the water, and then all of a sudden, like the water just like completely surrounds me, to where I'm almost in this like oceanic setting, and it's just like endless, you know, and that's what the abyss can do to you. And I don't know, I think I strive from that a little bit. I really do. I find myself kind of accruing a bit more power and courage in those moments when I'm like, okay, like I have fully given myself, like I've given myself the chance to fully understand what I'm about to engage in. And sure, it scares the living crap out of me, but I know that what happens, you know, after those 4 minutes that we're, you know, once the 4 minutes are up, it's like, yeah, we feel great. We're cold, but we feel great.
Yeah, and I actually think that makes total sense. And I can understand what you mean when you say you strive to spend time in that abyss, in that vulnerable state. And I can fully understand that, especially is still as close as you are to that initial challenge that or I guess the most recent challenge you faced with going through the bone marrow transplant, because it's still so it's only a little over a year out. You know, it's still very fresh there, and you're still understanding even the reality of what that state was, who that person was, you know, and you're figuring out, when you spend that time with that person, you're figuring out, who do I need to become to serve this person?
Yeah.
And that's where each one of these steps is a separate skill. I think the honesty you have quite mastered at this point. And it's like, by spending time in that abyss, in that vulnerable state, you're just working on mastering step 2.
Yeah, because it's all coming to the forefront at that moment.
Yeah, the most critical piece, and this is a piece you've never failed before, but the most critical piece is that regardless of how much time you spend in step 2, you do make that transition to step 3. Because if we don't do that, I think that is where the more dangerous aspect, and what Nietzsche was hinting at, is that's where we can start to become defined by that vulnerability.
Yeah.
We let that state dictate who we are and write that story for us, as opposed to us taking control of that situation, grabbing the pen and writing that new story. So I think that's the really key crucial point. And I don't think it necessarily always, like, it doesn't have to be, the goal isn't necessarily to always be as quick in that transition as humanly possible. But the reason I train that skill up is simply because sometimes in life you don't have time. Like when those impossible situations are placed upon you, you know, a severe injury, a severe diagnosis, whatever it is. We don't always have the luxury of time, but and so I want to be able to be skillful in that area for the moments that I don't have time. I have the ability to make that transition quickly when needed. But I also think it's highly worth the investment. And I realize now, thinking back to this, I had done a very similar thing with my lifting journey when it was still very raw, very emotional, very therapeutic in that manner, when I was working through a lot of my own cancer diagnosis challenges. In spending time on step 2, spending time in that vulnerable state, understanding who that person was, what they need you to become, what kind of story did they need at that point that now you have the opportunity to write. Mm-hmm. And it's worth doing that research, worth figuring out what does that story need to look like before you pick up the pen and just try to senselessly scribble words onto paper.
Yeah, you don't. For the man who knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable.
Absolutely. That's that Seneca quote you love. Mm-hmm. Love it, man.
Seneca the Younger.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, let us know in the comments what you think about that message, that stepwise process. Building courage, becoming courageous in the face of fear, using courage as a skill in helping you face the impossible. Step 1, being totally honest about the situation that you face. Step 2, being completely vulnerable about who you are in the moment, who you've been in some of your darkest moments, and really where that fear comes from and why does it reside so intensely within you. And from there, we transition to step 3, which is the clear vision of writing the story of who you are going forward. Never lie to yourself in that story, but always create a story in which you are the hero, never the victim, and you have the capacity to become the person that person in your most vulnerable state needed the very most. So let us know in the comments anytime you guys have had to face fearful situations. You've had to find a level of courage, maybe even a level of courage that you did not know you had access to. Let us know about those stories in the comments. We would love to hear about it. As always, click that top link in the description. Jump on our school community. We would love to have you guys there. You get early access to all episodes just like this, private Q&As with a lot of our guests, insights and deeper understanding and conversation, group calls, courses, all sorts of incredible material on how to take the be impossible mindset and completely weave it into your own life and how you approach every challenge you face and every goal you want to accomplish. So with that, anything else you got today, brother?
Absolutely love this conversation.
I did too, man. I did too. Let us know what you guys think in the comments. As always, if the only thing we ask of you is if you got something out of today's episode, please copy the link in the URL, paste it into a text message, email, social media post, whatever, wherever you want to share it, and share it with as many people as you know whom you believe it would help, because at the end of the day, that is how we achieve everything we are working to build with Impossible Performance. Please click that subscribe button, click the bell, so you always get notifications when we drop new episodes, which go live every single Tuesday. Unless you're in the school community, then you can get early access on Mondays. But outside of that, guys, we appreciate you being here, listening to these episodes, incorporating these messages and these skills in your day-to-day life. And that is how we're going to have the global vision that we've dreamed for since day one of Impossible Performance. Because at Impossible Performance, we are striving to build a global culture of strength, fostering a spirit of growth in constant pursuit of the impossible. Thank you guys for listening, and as always, be impossible.